if you lay in bed and you have a fantasy, a sexual fantasy, I'm not suggesting you do that right now, but if you do that, you're going to stimulate a whole range of physiological systems that evolution has built into your brain. You didn't put them there. You didn't put all those hormones, a cascade of hormones that will change your blood flow. Your brain won't really make a lot of distinctions of whether it's a real, something really you're seeing, or whether you're imagining it, okay? So it's the same process. We've done fMRI studies, and we've shown that when people are critical of themselves, they're stimulating very similar, not entirely the same, but similar areas of the brain, which is if they were being bullied and put down and frightened of being hurt by a dominant, it's the same kind of areas. So yes, basically. Now, you've got to be careful though, because that doesn't mean to say that depression is adaptive. We're not saying that. What we're saying is that there are mechanisms which have an evolutionary trajectory, history, phylogeny to them, but the way in which we can stimulate them can be highly maladaptive, because of our new brain capacities. And Steve will talk to you much more about that in terms of the ways in which we think, perspective taking, thinking in time, self as context, all that stuff. Those kinds of processes have the capacity to stimulate these underlying evolved systems, which can actually make us anxious or paranoid or depressed. But we're not saying that means that depression is adaptive, because we're not saying that. We're saying that the mechanisms of shutting you down in certain contexts, be it through helplessness or whatever, we have an evolutionary story for that. So no living thing chose to be what it is. No crocodile chose to be a crocodile, no elephant an elephant, no human a human, no man a man, woman a woman, black, white. We didn't choose any of this stuff, right? We just sort of find ourselves in a genetically built body with all these wishes and demands and feelings sort of firing off inside of us. And then, of course, according to the environments in which we live, the contexts, those processes get shaped. But we didn't choose that. I didn't choose to have a system that can make me angry or sexual or tired or frightened. I didn't choose any of that. That's all in there. That's being built in there. And that's why all humans, and indeed trans species as well, actually, all have the potential for these brain states, for these feeling states, for these emotions, because they're built there, right? The problem is, and again, as I think Steve will talk better to this than I can, is that people fuse with this. They think, this is me then, if I have rage, then I'm an angry person or I'm a bad person or whatever. As opposed to, no, this is a program in my mind, which has been put in by nature and maybe, choreographed a little bit because of my background. But what I can do is stand back from that. I can begin to observe it and decide what I want to do about that. And then that takes us into the whole issue about mindfulness. The more you become aware of what's going on in your mind without blaming and shaming yourself, without fusing with it, but you can then start to decide what you're going to do about it. So for us, this is very important. Now, there are lots of interesting sci-fis at the moment that are playing with these ideas that we're all programmed, but because we have these new brain competencies to be able to pay attention, to observe the mind, to be able to be aware of what's going on, we can make decisions about whether we want to let those programs run and do harmful things or helpful things. Really fascinating series called Westworld. It's a bit violent, but all working with this idea about the concept of programming, and my personal view, and I think Steve as well, is we need to wake up to the fact that we can't just let our minds run the programs that are destructive and hurtful and harmful, because we have them towards ourselves and to others. So when we understand that actually it's not my fault I've got all this stuff going on, I didn't choose it, I didn't build it. My brain has been built for me, not by me. All these archetypal systems, and they've been in humans since goodness knows when. They're all built. But how can I develop an awareness and a mind orientation with the motivation to live to be helpful, not harmful? How can I start to use my mind in order to do helpful things rather than harmful things to myself and others? So that's my kind of core story, really. I mean, there's so many things, isn't there, that aren't our fault. This virus isn't our fault, but it's our scientists that have developed the vaccines. We can't just sit around and wait for. We have to do something. We've got ourselves into a state of climate change, which is, we could say, it's not really our fault, any one person, but collectively we have to decide to take responsibility to do something about it. So the importance of taking responsibility, regardless of whose fault it is extremely important. Don't worry about who caused it. Don't worry about blaming. Just worry about, okay, so what would be helpful? What can I do that would be helpful? And that's in many ways a scientific question as well, because we don't always know. You have to work it out. But at least we can put the point was, if you get into blaming and shaming when you're trying to work with this mind, which can be pretty ferocious, people can have some pretty nasty fantasies or experiences or whatever, that diverts you from, let's forget about shaming and blaming, and let's actually think about, so what would help me? What would help me in this moment? I'm feeling enraged. So what would help me right now? How could I ground myself and just be in control so I can control my behavior? Because that's the key thing.